My name is Jonathan Meades, and this series is called Further Abroad. It's set in a distant present, in a land where there's no such word as ordinary, and where every...
Deepest England. Isn't this the very quintessence of deepest England? The village green. The good old village green.
Here's the stout oak. It was one of these solid, dependable chaps that sheltered good King, whatever his name was, after the Battle of... what's it called? Steeped in history, oaks are. The Royal Oak. Let's drink to it.
And here's God's house, old as the honest flints it's faced with.
Look at that clock, and think of the immemorial hours it's notched up. The singeing of the King of Spain's beard, Waterloo, the '66 World Cup. Let's raise a toast to our proud legacy.
A different lord lived here, Lord of the Manor, half-timbering, battlements, the accumulation of the centuries.
Every year the good Lord would oblige on St. Forelock's Day. Every man-jack in the manor would be treated to a yard of ale with which to toast the good Lord's beneficence.
And there's the Oast House, the former Oast House, I should say. It's a cute cottage now.
But there is a building on the green which still today fulfills the same function it did way back when knights were bold. It's the ale house, the tap room, the inn, the pub.
John Barleycorn thrives. Beer has adapted to the times, yet it's never failed in its appeal to that part of the English psyche which values, above all else, the past.
Good morning, sir.
What beers do you have?
We've got Old Jones, Old Roger, Old Bill, Old Tom, Old Bob, Old Jock, Old Devil, Old Growler, Old Grumble, Old Bushy Tail, Old Speckled Hen, Old Timer, Old Thumper, Old Hooky, Old Smoky, Old Strong, Old Horizontal, Old Peculiar, Old Lubrication, Old Fart, Old Masters, Old Merlin, Old Nix, Old Bircham, Old Luxter, Old Maidstone, Old Carrack, Old Ale, Old Navigation...
The entire industry is a sort of caricatural mirror to England. When its premises or its products are not genuinely old, they're subjected to antiquing to bring them into line. There's a sort of conspiracy with the consumer here, a suspension of disbelief, if you like. Oldness is in demand. It shifts units.
There are in England more pubs than there are any other type of building save houses. 83,000 of them. Vast sums have been invested by breweries in the provision of beer outlets. Pubs are everywhere. A place without one is an oddity. And so too is a new pub an oddity, an anomaly. Very few have been built since the Second World War. As a building type, the public house belongs, like churches, to the past. Newness is a sort of heresy in the licence trade. And it's a building type that didn't get its name by accident.
The public house, which is first a house, and only then a place to which the public are admitted in order to drink, is a sentimentally valued relic of a time when small-scale brewing was a necessity, and of when the horizons of most people's lives were much narrower than they are today.
We coo over them. We ascribe wisdom to the old boys in the corner. We subscribe to that topsy-turvy snobbery that celebrates flat caps and dominoes.
A pint of bitter, please.
Pint of Providence, thank you.
Worst of all, we invest the straitened, arduous life of the land, the life that gave rise to such pubs, with qualities it never possessed. There never was anything noble about demeaning and ill-paid toil. That has always been a convenient fiction of the clerisy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Must be broken. These places have an unmistakable appeal now that we don't have to frequent them, now that we can visit them at will, thankful that they're not our inescapable lot. We mourn the passing of these atavistic taps because we have it as an article of faith that improvement is no improvement. Our fondness for the ancient is a sort of resignation at our inadequacy to make a better present. It's a faute de mieux shrug. It's the pessimism that dares not speak its name.
Ooh, aren't oasthouses cute? Don't build them like this anymore. That'll be because they're industrial buildings whose technology has been superseded.
Oasthouses, hop kilns, are not actually that old. They mostly belong to the 19th century. They were built as ovens for drying hops, and that job determined their appearance.
Industrial buildings, and oasthouses are industrial buildings, fare better if they're rural. They're eye-catchers, they're desirable properties. Indeed, they have been converted into dwelling houses more than 100 years ago.
Today, there are hardly any in Kent and Sussex that are still working, but their singular shape remains, recalling the silhouetted hoods of Wealden penitents or Ku Klux Kentishmen.
The oasthouse is a type of building that's peculiar to the ancient English rite of brewing. It's insolubly linked with that rite, no matter what its subsequent use may be.
We've been living here now for about 3 years. It's working very well, and we've been able to combine both the historic side of the old building together with all the modern amenities that modern science and technology allows. It's rather nice also because we're on the hillside. We've got quite an amount of land with it, which is rather lovely. While we were doing our research, we discovered to our delight that 4 generations of my family had farmed here, which was an added bonus. The animals obviously appreciate having the land. It's very, very nice for them, and indeed they're quite nice for us because they do protect us. We have had the odd unwanted visitor.
When buildings are still employed for the use for which they're intended, as is the case with many hop kilns in Herefordshire, they tend not to look pristine. They look lived in, although of course they are not lived in.
I dried hops in these kilns last year and have been doing the job for 25 years. I've also done other jobs: sheep shearing, grave digging, hair cutting, rabbit catching, and worked on the farm through the war. Now I'm a country sort of chap. Me father comes from Fairham. He's got lots more kids there just like me, and he well knows how to rear 'em.
These buildings are valued for their continuing utility rather than for their aesthetic worth. That seems to come later. And they also prompt consideration of a different sort of oldness.
For I can drive a plough and milk a cow.
They have not yet become exhibits in the showcase labelled yesterday.
I'm as fresh as the daisy that grows in the field, and they calls I Buttercup Joe.
Brews have fans the way that soccer clubs do. Reason is amended, both by loyalty and by alcohol, of course. Camera is more than a club whose members like to compare the size of their bladders. It's also a manifestation of anti-metropolitanism, anti-modernism. Your choice of ale is a lifestyle statement.
Yeah, I didn't like that one. That's not the American one.
Beer is not like soap. Well, not usually. There are not soap societies and soap festivals and soap guides. There are not home soapers who get together on weekends to wash with each other's products. But then beer is no ordinary product.
This is my lounge, and over here is my collection of bottled beers from all over the world, but mainly Germany and Belgium. This is our collection of violins and other musical instruments, because most of the family are in fact musicians. This is my kitchen, which we always like to decorate with locally grown hops. And out here is my garden and backyard. We like to switch the lights on in the evening, as it's a wonderful place to spend the summer's evening. This is my fig tree. We actually get excellent fruit off this in the late summer, but in here, which was once a wash house, is now in fact my brewery. I have the 3 fermenting vessels, and this is the mash tun where we soak the barley grains with the hot water. I installed this plant just over a year ago since leaving British Telecom, and since then I've been a full-time brewer and producing approximately 30 barrels of beer a week, a beer which I consider one of the best in the country. Certainly far better than that produced by the large breweries, whose beer I wouldn't wash my dog in.
Small-scale breweries are more than mere enterprises. They possess a folksy glamour. They preserve the mystique of English ale. They're in contact with English land and English water. And they're Davids, pitted against the Goliaths of the corporate vats. Every football team, no matter how humble, believes that one day it will win the cup. And potting sheds encourage great dreams. Even Bass, mighty Bass, had to start somewhere. In a house, as it happens.
Beer's centrality in English life, its equation with England itself, depends not just on the 83,000 pubs. In small town after town, the dominant building is not the church, not the town hall, but the brewery. Beer bigger than civic pride, than Christian virtue? Who knows? But the appetite for it surely outdoes the appetites for those abstractions.
The gross physical presence of breweries is more welcome than that of other factories, on account of the product. A town is often identified by its brewery.
In a country town such as Devizes, the brewery of Messrs. Wadworth announces itself by its size and height, and by the inaptness of its industrial bricks. The brewery is a specialised piece of plant whose author is as much brewing engineer as architect. In many places, some of them hardly more than villages, the first real factory to be built was the factory whose end was to get the populace pissed. This was a commercial and architectural recognition of an invariable need. The main industry, sometimes the only industry, was intoxication. There is an analogy with feudalism. An Englishman's brewery is his castle. The brewer was the lord of the town. And the population was not merely chemically dependent on the product of the factory, but economically dependent too. These small-town breweries became big-time employers. As the demand for beer grew through the 19th century, so did the buildings of the brewing process grow. At Sleaford, Bass's former maltings are over 100 yards long. They're harsh and austere. The architecture of intoxication was sober. Solidity and sweat. That's what these buildings convey. What does the capital of English brewing tell us about ourselves? How does it reflect the nation at whose centre it lies? Burton-upon-Trent was to beer what Sheffield was to steel, Manchester to cotton. It was created by beer, dependent on beer. There was nothing else. Massive red breweries dominated every street. Their private narrow-gauge railways crossed and recrossed every street. It may not have been pretty, but it possessed an architectural consistency and integrity. It was all of a piece. Brewhouse to the nation. And it destroyed itself, turned itself into a car park, obliterated its real history, the history that resides in brick, and replaced that with a cosmetic history. What remains of Old Burton is mainly peripheral.
Marmite. A German invention, a French name, an English institution. But that's not so odd, really. Many of our institutions are imports. Think of the royal family, think of Vindaloo, think of Rottweilers. Marmite feeds off the detritus of the brewing process. So it's not only foreign, it's a vampire to boot.
Many of the buildings which have survived here were the products of the Victorian beerage's self-advertising philanthropy. A philanthropy made possible by the enormous profits beer generated. We have the Bass family to thank for the almshouses, for the town hall, and also for several clubs, much workers' housing, and at least 6 churches. And at Rangemore, just outside Burton, they built the social club, they built the school, they built the church. In fact, they built the whole village. The irony is that these buildings might be found anywhere, whilst the ale stores and cooperages and malt houses, which have not survived, existed nowhere else in such profusion.
Here is a painting of the young brewer and future worthy Andrew Walker and of some of his friends tasting Walkers. A commonplace event, no doubt, but one which is elevated by its representation in a work of art commissioned by Walker.
The painting is a mild private boast. A public boast required something much larger. What better for the artistically inclined brewer than to found an entire picture gallery? The Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. Art may never be so popular as beer, but patronage of the stuff was a surer guarantee of posthumous fame than brewing. In such a building, a brewer might express a zeal for the improvement of the Walker-swilling classes. This sort of architectural taste would have been commercial ruin if applied to his pubs. The custom-built city pub, as opposed to inn, hotel, taproom, was, on the contrary, a kind of building that revelled in vulgarity. Modesty and decorum were not its concerns. It had more to do with the England of music hall than the England of dainty refinement. The apogee of pub design was reached in the jingoistic years round the turn of the century. It was an urban form. Brassy, hard, confident, pompous, exuberant, fantastical, and funny. They advertised the brewer's might and wealth. They must have seemed extraordinary. They gave the poor a taste of the rich life in exchange for the price of a drink. They enticed with easy luxury, opulence and bounty, the way that churches once had.
There has subsequently been only one significant type of expressly constructed pub, the type that was occasioned by the rise of popular motoring between the wars. It was typically suburban rather than urban, and it obviously didn't rely on local punters.
The roadhouse self-consciously recalled a previous age of travel. The getaway people of the 30s got away into an arterial roadscape of would-be coaching inns, of costume drama highwaymen's taverns, of village pubs expanded to accommodate towns on the move. Their imperative was to attract potential trade passing at, say, 50 miles an hour, so they had to be made on the scale of hoardings. Hoardings themselves. The exuberance was now exterior. Pulling the punters in was the thing. A prominent sight on a well-frequented road, that was the ticket. And, of course, a promise of the olden days, to remind the family out for a spin of its genealogy reaching back to Dick Turpin. Stylistically, these places may have varied, but they were basically all in the anachronism business, which is an English speciality, perhaps the English speciality.
Yet while the places where beer met its audience were increasingly invested with a stagey, one-dimensional, rather light-hearted revivalism, the places where it was manufactured made no such attempt at disguise.
Look at the greatest brewery of the Roadhouse era, Guinness's in West London. There is a tremendous gulf between the applied antiquity of those pubs and the austere monumentalism of Giles Gilbert Scott's brewery. Scott was a sculptural geometer who evidently preferred brick to glass and concrete, but he shunned references to the past. These shapes are abstracted, elemental, modern. Subsequent brewery architecture has tended towards nakedness. The Courage Brewery near Reading is a negligee around a machine, raw plant in a see-through nightie. England that these machines for making intoxicants recall is that of the white heat of 60s technology, of gadgets and gizmos. All of this speaks of a total faith in brewing science rather than in hands-on craft. An even more extreme degree of the modernist tenet about the expression of function is to be found in the latest fermentation hardware. It doesn't bother with clothes at all. Exposed organs, nudity without the skin. Beer's architecture is moving in two contrary directions. The more advanced, the more reliant on pure technology and robo-facture the production process becomes, the more modern it gets. The more heavy-handed is the application of oldness to the point of sale. This new oldness is in earnest. It means it. It's not like roadhouse oldness. Its purpose is not to entertain, not to suggest, what a lark, that we're boozing in the sort of place Errol Flynn swings across bearing his mighty cutlass. That's make-believe. This is technophilia masking itself with Luddism. Computers pretending to be hands that have lost fingers in the great struggle. The new oldness is bereft of irony. It's a bolster against the present. It isn't sodomy that's the English disease. It isn't snobbery. It's the pusillanimous retreat into the past, or into the pretend past.
Lamplighters drank here, and chimney sweeps, and the men who dug the cuttings on the North London arm of the Grand Union Canal, and the Tolpuddle martyrs, and Keir Hardie. He shifted a few pints in here, not to mention John Lennon. In and out he was, researching working class hero, stickler for detail.
No. 2 years ago, this was a Chinese restaurant. Now it's a piece of England, forever England, where we can bury our heads in the past like it was sand. We can burrow through the dew.